The contract sat on the white tablecloth like a loaded gun. 5 albums, complete creative control, $7 million up front. Clive Davis leaned back in his chair at Le Bernardin, watching Marvin Gaye stare at the papers that could change everything. The restaurant hummed with quiet conversations, but at their corner table, silence stretched like a held breath. The October afternoon light filtered through tall windows, casting shadows across numbers that seemed to dance before Marvin's eyes. 7 million. The amount felt abstract, like a figure from someone else's life. "This is your moment, Marvin," Clive said softly, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had built empires. "Motown treats you like product. We'll treat you like the artist you are." Marvin's fingers traced the contract's edge, feeling the expensive paper beneath his fingertips. His hands were shaking. The numbers blurred together. 7 million up front. Points on every album. Creative control that meant no executive could demand he change a lyric or soften a message. He closed his eyes. In the darkness, he heard his father's voice, sharp as broken glass. "Money is the root of all evil, boy. You sell your soul for 30 pieces of silver." Marvin opened his eyes. Clive was still watching, still waiting. "I can't," Marvin said quietly. The words fell between them like stones into deep water. Clive Davis blinked. In 20 years of making deals, signing legends, building careers, he had never heard those 2 words in response to an offer like this. Artists fought for half of what he'd just laid on the table. "I'm sorry?" Clive asked, certain he had misheard. Marvin stood up slowly. "I said I can't. The music isn't for sale." He left the contract on the table and walked out, leaving Clive Davis sitting alone with $7 million worth of paper and no understanding of what had just happened. But Marvin understood. Even as he walked down Fifth Avenue in the October cold, even as he felt the weight of the biggest opportunity of his career dissolving behind him, he understood exactly why he had said no. He just wished it didn't feel like dying. 3 months earlier, Marvin had been in Studio A at Hitsville, USA, finishing "Let's Get It On." The song was perfect. Sensual, smooth, commercial enough for radio, but deep enough to matter. Berry Gordy had called it a guaranteed #1, and for once Marvin believed him. The success of What's Going On had changed everything. The album Motown initially refused to release, calling it too political, too risky, had become both a critical masterpiece and commercial triumph. It proved Marvin could be more than a romantic crooner. He could be a voice for his generation. But success came with its own prison. Let's Get It On was climbing the charts when the first approach came. Not from Clive directly, but through intermediaries, industry whispers. CBS Records was interested, very interested. They saw what Motown had, a mature artist at peak creative powers, and they wanted it. The meeting started casually, a lunch here, a phone call there. Industry people who mentioned how much creative freedom CBS offered their artists, how much they paid, how different things could be for someone of Marvin's caliber. Marvin listened but never committed. Something felt wrong, though he couldn't pinpoint what. Maybe it was how these people looked at him, like they were calculating his worth in dollars and cents. Maybe it was how they talked about his music like it was a commodity to be acquired. Or maybe it was the voice in his head, his father's voice, warning him about the dangers of greed. Marvin Gaye Sr. had been a Pentecostal minister before the family moved to Detroit, a man who preached fire and brimstone and the corruption of worldly desires. Money was sin, success was temptation, and Marvin, even as a child, had been marked as the one most likely to fall. "You got greed in your eyes, boy," his father would say during the beatings that came whenever young Marvin showed interest in material things. "The devil got his hooks in you already." The beating that followed his 8th birthday was the worst. Young Marvin had asked why people gave money to God, an innocent question that triggered his father's rage. But it wasn't just the question, it was the way Marvin's eyes had lingered on the collection plate, counting the bills with obvious fascination. "Money is the root of all evil," his father screamed, using a leather belt to punctuate each word. The belt came down across Marvin's back, his arms, his legs. "What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world but lose his soul?" Each strike was methodical, calculated to hurt but not damage permanently. This wasn't rage. This was religious instruction delivered through pain because pain, his father believed, was the only language sin understood. I see how you look at things you want, his father continued. Toys in store windows, other children's clothes, that covetous spirit gonna damn you if I don't beat it out now. By the time it was over, Marvin was curled on the floor, sobbing and promising he would never think about money again, never want anything he didn't need, never let greed poison his heart. But the damage was deeper than physical bruises. Something inside him had broken that day. The natural human desire for security had been branded as sin. Those words had followed him his entire life, echoing in every moment of professional triumph. Through his early Motown days, when every hit felt like evidence of moral failure. Through his marriage to Anna Gordy, when he wondered if he was using the connection for advancement. Through What's Going On, when the political message felt pure but commercial success felt tainted. Now, with CBS offering millions, those childhood fears came roaring back. What if his father was right? What if success was just another word for selling out? The meeting with Clive Davis was scheduled for Tuesday, October 1973. Marvin almost didn't go. He spent the morning pacing his apartment, chain-smoking, staring at the phone. 3 times he started to dial Clive's office to cancel. 3 times he hung up. Finally, he got dressed and took a cab to the airport. Clive was waiting at Le Bernardin, sitting at a corner table. He looked up when Marvin approached and smiled the kind of smile that had convinced legends to leave their labels. "Marvin," he said, standing to shake hands. "Thank you for coming." They made small talk while ordering, but Marvin could feel the contract's presence like a physical weight. "Let's talk about your future," Clive said finally, sliding the contract across the table. Marvin read slowly, carefully. 5 albums over 7 years. Complete creative control. 7 million up front, plus royalty rates that dwarfed Motown's offer. It was everything an artist could want. Everything Marvin had complained about not having at Motown. Freedom to make the music he wanted, financial security to take risks, respect as an equal partner rather than a product. "This is generous," Marvin said quietly. "You're worth it," Clive replied. "What's Going On proved you're not just another Motown act. You're an artist, a voice. We want to give you the platform that voice deserves." Marvin nodded, staring at the contract. The numbers pulsed. $7 million. He could feel Clive's eyes on him, patient but expectant. The restaurant sounds faded. Clinking glasses, murmured conversations, the soft scrape of silverware on china. All of it became background noise to the war raging in his head. In his mind, he heard his father preaching, "What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world but lose his soul?" "I need to think about it," Marvin said. Clive's smile never wavered. "Of course. But Marvin, opportunities like this don't come often. Motown made you a star. We can make you a legend." That's when Marvin realized what bothered him. It wasn't the money itself. It was what it represented. Proof that everything his father had said about him was true. That underneath the spiritual seeking and social consciousness, he was just another greedy performer, willing to sell himself to the highest bidder. His throat felt tight, his chest constricted. The leather belt across his 8-year-old back might as well have been striking him in this moment. "I can't," he said, the words coming before he could stop them. The rest was a blur. Clive's confusion, his attempts to negotiate, his disbelief that anyone would walk away from such an offer. But Marvin was already gone emotionally, back in his childhood home, listening to his father explain why money corrupted everything it touched. News of the refused offers spread through the industry like wildfire. $7 million. Complete creative freedom. Everything an artist claimed to want, and Marvin Gaye had simply said no. The story grew in the telling. Some versions had Marvin laughing at the offer. Others claimed he had torn up the contract. But those who knew him understood the truth was simpler and more complicated. He had walked away because staying felt like the only way to stay sane. Some people respected the decision, seeing artistic integrity. Others thought he was insane, that pride and loyalty had clouded his judgment. Record store owners noticed something strange. Sales of Let's Get It On actually increased. People wanted to hear what an artist who couldn't be bought sounded like. But Marvin himself wasn't sure which group was right. Barry Gordy, who heard about the CBS offer through industry gossip, was both grateful and suspicious. "You thinking about leaving us, Marvin?" Barry asked during a tense meeting. "I thought about it," Marvin admitted. "But this is where I belong." He said the words but wasn't sure he believed them. The truth was more complicated. He hadn't stayed out of loyalty. He had stayed because leaving felt like admitting his father's worst fears were true. That realization sat in his chest like a stone. The months that followed were lonely. Marvin threw himself into work, recording sessions that stretched deep into the night. He was working on I Want You, but the creative process felt different now, heavier. Every melody, every lyric was filtered through the weight of his decision. He found himself calling old friends less frequently. When they asked about the CBS offer, and they all asked, he gave vague answers about loyalty and artistic integrity. He never told anyone the real reason, that he was terrified of proving his father right. The isolation deepened when he realized that refusing the money hadn't brought the peace he expected. If anything, it made him more conscious of his relationship with success, more paranoid about his motivations. Was I Want You genuine artistic expression, or was he trying to prove he didn't need CBS? Was his loyalty to Motown real, or just fear dressed up as principle? The questions consumed him during the long Detroit winters of 1974 and 1975. He would sit in his home studio for hours, playing the same chord progressions repeatedly, searching for something pure, untainted by commercial considerations or childhood trauma. But purity was elusive. Every song carried the weight of choices made and unmade. By 1976, the financial reality was becoming clear. While his Motown royalties were substantial, they were nothing compared to what he could have earned at CBS. His ex-wife, Anna, was demanding higher alimony. The IRS was asking questions. The comfortable cushion that allowed artistic decisions without commercial worry was eroding. Still, he didn't regret the decision. Not exactly. But late at night, when the house was quiet and he was alone with increasingly heavy drinking, Marvin sometimes wondered what his life would look like if he had signed that contract. Would he be happier? More fulfilled? Or would the guilt have consumed him anyway? He was thinking about these questions one cold evening in February 1977 when the phone rang. It was late, nearly midnight, and Marvin had been sitting in his living room, nursing a glass of scotch. When he answered, the voice was immediately familiar. "Marvin," Clive Davis said, "I hope I'm not calling too late. I was thinking about you today." They had spoken a few times since the restaurant meeting, always cordially, always with mutual respect and puzzlement that neither could quite bridge. "I'm doing well," Marvin said, though his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I heard I Want You on the radio yesterday," Clive said. "Beautiful work. You're still making music that matters." There was something in Clive's voice, not pity exactly, but a kind of wistful admiration that made Marvin uncomfortable. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" Clive asked carefully. Marvin closed his eyes. "Every day. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice," Marvin admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The scotch had loosened his tongue, made him vulnerable in ways he usually kept locked away. "Sometimes I think about the albums I could have made, the messages I could have gotten out to more people. The platform you offered, it was everything I thought I wanted." There was silence on the line. Then Clive spoke, his voice gentle. "Bud? Any regrets?" It was the question Marvin had been asking himself for 4 years. The honest answer was complicated. He regretted the financial strain. He regretted the way the decision had isolated him from industry opportunities. He regretted the nagging doubt it created about his motivations. But he didn't regret staying true to something deeper than commerce, whatever that something was. "No," Marvin said finally. "No regrets." After hanging up, he sat in the darkness for a long time. Outside, Detroit was settling into another cold night. Inside, Marvin was still wrestling with the same questions that had haunted him since childhood. Was he a man of principle, or just a man afraid of his own desires? Was his refusal artistic integrity or psychological damage? Was he free or trapped by fears that weren't even his own? He never found definitive answers. But in the years that followed, through personal struggles and professional triumphs, through the creation of music that would outlive them all, Marvin carried the weight of that decision like a talisman. The decision had cost him more than money. It had cost him relationships in the industry, opportunities that would never come again, the financial security that might have allowed him to take even greater creative risks. But it had also given him something that couldn't be purchased, the knowledge that his art belonged to him. He had been offered everything the music industry could give him, and he had walked away. Whether that made him a saint or a fool, he was never quite sure, but it made him himself. And in a world that constantly tried to turn artists into products, that was worth more than $7 million. Even if it cost him everything else. The contract had sat on that white tablecloth like a loaded gun, and Marvin Gaye had chosen not to pull the trigger. Not because he wasn't tempted, not because the money didn't matter, but because somewhere deep inside he heard his father's voice asking the question that had defined his entire life. What shall it profit a man if he gain the whole world but lose his soul? And for once, Marvin had an answer he could live with, even if living with it meant dying a little every day. The music wasn't for sale. It never had been. It never would be. $7 million had been sitting on that table, but some things were worth more than money. Some things were worth everything, even if everything wasn't enough.